Elitch Gardens review saga, which started off with Twister 3 Storm Chaser. Colorado's current most iconic coaster, as the coaster would hold the most unique appearance for a coaster within the state, due to the large size of the wooden coaster structure, and the twisting layout. It will be the state's longest non-mountain coaster, along with the 10th current longest wooden coaster in the world, being impressive within itself. While not the oldest coaster in the state, the ride inhabits one of the few pieces of identity that the modern Elitch Gardens holds. However, for many fans of the original, they claim to have a massive downgrade from the legendary predecessor that operated at the original Elitch Gardens from 1965 into the park's closing in October 1994, with the sequel being known in general as extremely weak in forces or even non-existent. While I haven't ridden the original variation for obvious reasons of not being alive in the 1990s, I found the successor to be quite interesting to the ride, both in terms of layout and in forces. So here on Diesel's Coaster Reviews, I want to present the experience of Twister 3 Storm Chaser. From the name of the ride and description from the intro, Twister 3 wouldn't be the first to acquire the name or even the general layout. At the original Elitch Gardens in 1965, the original coaster named Mr. Twister would be manufactured for the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, along with the layout designer being John C. Allen. For the 29 years that the coaster operated for, the coaster would be massively looked as one of the greatest for Colorado coasters in Colorado history, making it a reputation of the best coaster within the state's history and one of the best wooden coasters in the United States. Now, while I would wish that the original was still around, the coaster would be forced to close with the park when it would be decided to relocate to a larger location within the same city for a larger piece of the land to use for further expansions. While the majority of rides at the old Elitch Gardens were relocated, like Sidewinder, the Aero-launched Looper, both Mr. Twister and Wildcat were likely incapable due to the nature of relocating a wooden coaster being more difficult compared to other rides, as in the wooden structure, plus the limited land that Elitch Gardens would hold. Sadly, both coasters would actually die and decease with the original location. Luckily, there were two successors for Mr. Twister built. One of those was Knobel's adaptation built in-house called Twister, while the other would be Elitch Gardens' second attempt called Twister 2 at the time. This version wouldn't be a clone of the original, but rather a pseudo-original layout that was both taller, faster, and longer, manufactured by the company called Hensel Phillips as a one-off of their behalf, a engineering company within the state of Colorado, along with John Pierce, most infamous for designing the layouts of Rattler at Six Flags Fiesta Texas and White Canyon at Maryland for the RCCA company. From my understanding, all three wooden coasters listed on the RCDB, as designed by John Pierce, would prioritize impressive stats for wooden coasters or increasing the stats from previous existing layouts, but lacked in the intensity or consistent pacing that you would want to see in a wooden coaster. From reviews, many riders agree that these layouts usually lose speed most of the time, along with a lot of drawn out elements that could call boring if they are not impacted by the roughness. Although, due to being underneath Hensel Phillips, Twister 3 is considered to have been much more smoother compared to these RCCA creations, or Roller Coaster Corporation of America for those unaware of what RCCA means. Finally, I like to mention that both Rattler and White Canyon are now defunct in their original iterations, so the only opportunity to experience a John Pierce layout, unless you're counting Wildcat's reprofiling when they got relocated to Frontier City, is the one and only Elitch Gardens for a full-on John Pierce layout. The final thing I like to talk about the history for the ride is the period of time in 2022 where Twister 2 would get a big refurbishment that would both help improve the structure of the ride, along with transforming the ride from the ordinary wooden coaster Twister 2 to a more detailed and themed experience called Twister 3 Storm Chaser, where it has various amounts of decoration inside the queue relating towards the post effects of a Twister Storm, along with participating in a business called Storm Chaser. While the story isn't really too important, it is quite cool to see something more detailed at Elitch Gardens. This and Meow Wolf Kaleidoscape are two examples of actually having theming and at least a little bit more variety than, let's say, having nothing that the other parts of the park would have. Visual aspects of the ride. The coaster structure in itself has a consistent white paint scheme throughout the structure and track, giving a nice visual attraction of the coaster when far away of the park. Additionally, I also like the display of the wacky layout and as some of these turns present when seeing the ride in whole, giving a unique appearance that the other three wooden coasters I've seen didn't for the time being. However, both of these aspects don't really feel consistent in quality, since the appearance within the park for the layout only shows some the track from the closest terms from the main pathway, if the ride appears at all on your path. As the coaster is located in the most northwestern corner of the park, a clear representation of the coaster's layout is in the queue when the structure surrounding the rider. To be fair, it is cool having a wooden coaster surrounding most fields of direction, and I wouldn't blame someone for liking this novelty. However, I would personally prefer a more clear view of the coaster's layout due to the footage purposes that I unfortunately would want to use for a review like that I have pretty limited, since many moments are obstructed by the supports. At the very least, we'll be using the canopy coaster footage, because despite this review being written months and months in advance, I am, of course, late again in the review, so boo-hoo. Additionally, I also found the paint on the wood to be a bit faded when getting closer to the coaster, resulting in looking a bit ugly and less fresh in color than what the coaster could potentially achieve, especially when wooden coasters use paint to their fullest advantage, looking both appealing and unique. But at the very least, I wouldn't say this really looks too dull, because I think wooden paint schemes at least show some bit more interest and all. Now, in terms of the location of the park and in wait times, the coaster would be isolated in the back left corner of the entrance, making the location the most isolated non-kiddie coaster in the park. Therefore, I could see the coaster during the start of the day having a shorter line, as many closer better rides exist in the park. That said, I do remember this having a bit of a longer line when the park kind of dispersed, along with the fact that Twister 3 could have a longer line, as, you know, it is one of the more unique attractions in the park. It is definitely much more of a intrigue and much larger ride compared to some of the other rides, and that some locals actually think this is the best ride in the park. So there is some appeal to that. Now, while there is no wrong answer towards, going with Twister 3, there is some other advantages if you got to choose between all of the other roller coasters, especially if you're going to go for one of the more unreliable coasters like Sidewinder or Halfpipe, just to get it out of the way before those break down, or the fact that you could go with Mind Eraser if you want to have a bit of more concern for getting on that ride if that gets busy, although I'll say that could be one of the lesser weights towards the later parts of the day, versus Twister 3 that could be much more of a longer time. Speaking of capacity, the ride holds 3 trains of 18 passengers, although from my experience I do see the train using 2 trains at max, one for the station and one for the layout itself. They'll usually run 2 trains. There's sometimes that it will be reduced to 1, unfortunately, with one of my experience in seeing one train being removed from the track and having just one, and this can exaggerate a lot of the duration for people waiting in the station, as it takes eons to get this exact train back to the station, and really that's just terrible timing for some. So just notice this fact when before riding and all. At the very least, you can choose your own row, so just walk into the row, although grouping could be quite messy from experience as the station becomes crowded for a crowd that was proportioned for many cycles beforehand. Additionally, the coasters usually retract during the early operation times of the season of the park, although it is very likely that to see the coaster open up in the summer. From my experience of going in 2026, I definitely saw the coaster being retract, and that's unfortunately a missed opportunity of riding that, and of course half pipe. We'll get to that when we get to the actual review of the park. But in terms of seating, I have my sole ride in the most back row during my first visit, in which, while I don't have any knowledge on the front, I'd assume that both the front and back could be the strongest for forces on the ride. However, I could see an argument for the front, given that the 2 rows per 3-row car are known to give a smooth ride due to the placement of the wheels being placed further away in the front 2 rows of the car. Thankfully, these trains are comfortable based on feeling padded and semi-minimalistic in terms of roughness due to the PTC trains. Although the rider will still feel the roughness still. In which, to comment on the roughness before going, it is actually kind of, interesting to see it, instead of, brutally rough, and it is actually a comedic part of the ride. Anyways, once the train dispatches, the coaster slowly descends into the lift hill via a right turn. While no forces are present, the track would present some moderate but frequent bumpiness while descending, which would feel a bit of a concern to me in riding. As well, the ride didn't hurt, especially at this moment. I was potentially concerned of what the rest of the layout could do to impact my day, as the turn being slow and bumping could only result in a potential teaser of what to come, at least what I thought once we approached the lift hill. Coincidentally, though, I think that the slower moments of the ride are actually rougher than, the faster parts, and that is something quite quirky and all that you usually don't see on a lot of wooden coasters. After the lift, the coaster would have a scenic turnaround. I'll give credit to Twister 3 for having pretty nice views of both surrounding buildings in Denver and the park. Be the best views from a coaster within the park, although not the best views in general for Elitch Gardens, as the Drop Tower and Starflyer are much better for this. This turnaround then leads towards Twister 3's first drop, which at least in the back offers absolutely no forces, combined with the roughest part of the ride being frequently bumpy in the valley. Interestingly, this coaster would become my roughest coaster when we were at this point of the layout, at least for the time riding it as the 43rd credit. With the coaster having the most frequent bumpiness out of any of the point. That said, I will say that the coaster in the same park, being Mind Eraser, is considerably more rougher. And I've done other coasters too, so there's that. But despite this, I still didn't mind the roughness, since at the very least it didn't hurt me. Along the more padded seat back, which plus roughness that was neither painful nor didn't have many directional changes to find uncomfortable towards me. Although, to avoid any repetitiveness, most turns and valleys are going to be bumpy, with exceptions I'll list throughout the review when we get there. What follows next is Twister 3's most aggressive moment, being 2 back-to-back lateral jolts when ascending, which gave some moderately aggressive moments of laterals that had a sustainability of in between of more sustained lateral moments and more jolty transitions from coasters that used less hardline transitions. For my rides, I found the moment to be most memorable of the coaster, based on how unique the moments was in terms of coasters overall for me in terms of forces, plus the moments being most different compared to many of the other forces within the ride. Then comes a high turnaround, where while the moments had no forces, there was at least some interesting shuffling during the turn that was notable instead of painful or uncomfortable. This was actually a very interesting moment where it was actually kind of quirky that I couldn't find any other part of the of any coaster really. But yeah, this was a very interesting moment, and anyways, next follows a second turn drop and a step up that steadily offers no airtime nor positives. Fortunately, Twister 3 holds a second high off turn that gives extremely weak laterals throughout the turn. These same forces will repeat for the next 2 high off ground turns for the moments that hold tighter radiuses. but strangely not the bottom pieces, as again, these are more wider turns. And yes, then follows with a turn up into a straight section that offers no forces from both the turn and little dips down and up. Then the next drop offers no laterals as well, despite twisting down towards the left and into an enclosed but forceless and smooth turnaround. This then follows with a drop down into a small little hill that offers another lateral kink. Back to the bumpiness, although not as strong as the first one. Then follows a little bit of laterals on the low ground turn before ascending up into the turn, losing those laterals, unfortunately. And then ascending this hills into the brake run. Now, in terms of positives, this would be a pretty long ride, as in benefits to the ride, as 4,640 feet is something not to scoff at. While there are longer coasters west, as there are 10 to 11 coasters that are more lengthy, it's still impressive that a coaster this lengthy exists at a place like Elitch Gardens. Plus, as a bonus, the coaster was built before all these 11 except for Desperado, which is very uncertain for what its future is going to be. Additionally, the ride surprisingly was both quantitative and consistent in both laterals from an on-ride standpoint, which was higher than the expectations of having similar forces to Incredicoaster in terms of consistency. Despite having a nice length and many moments of force, there are a few things to do to detract from the higher position of the ranking. One was related to Twister 3 having much weaker laterals than the competition. While on its own I did enjoy the coaster, there are coasters afterwards that I rode that hold much better laterals in quantity and quality. Ghost Rider and El Loco do dominate Twisted 3 in their own ways in laterals, while others like Viper, Mind Eraser, and Silver Bullet holding much better laterals as well. That's not even accounting to the other coasters I rode even after I wrote this review. Second, and bigger determining factor, was the lack of any forces but laterals. As well, there are a lot of laterals. They rather feel repetitive and don't hold any other forces, sadly. Which kind of sucks, because there could have been some nice airtime moments, potentially from some of the concepts of the elements, like the drops, the bunny hills, and stuff. But alas, for a giant and long wooden coaster west that holds laterals, Ghost Rider is the place where they combine laterals and airtime successfully. So in terms of rankings, I would have ranked this at 20th out of 46 when we reached the end of 2024, where during the time this would have been between Boomerang and Accelerator, as Boomerang would have been more consistent and notable with forces / elements, while Accelerator felt too short and underwhelming in comparison to my 2024 rides due to having only one element throughout the experience and material given, and thus Twister 3 back then edged in terms of moments spread throughout the layout. Although I would say that these rankings have changed over a 23-month time span, as gaining new roller coasters in my 2025 and 2026 catalog, plus improved rides on Accelerator that consisted of a slightly more powerful launch and a drop between ejector airtime, and would have moved down this coaster to 36 out of 84 for Twister 3. It now sits between Sidewinder for the more superior forces, and then Raging Cajun, where Twister 3 I would say is a more creative layout than the Raging Cajun at Six Flags America. Yes, honestly, if it's uncertain if I'll rewrite Twister 3 in the future to update my opinions, as there's not that much reason to go back to Colorado for my main reason, just kind of disappearing during my last visit of Elitch Gardens, but for what it is, I at least enjoyed Colorado's wooden coaster wall during the moment. While this is very uncertain that this will be my favorite roller coaster in Colorado, as even if I do rewrite it, I might prefer some of the others like Cyclone, Defiance, the shuttle coasters, and Mind Racer. It was still a fun experience. Anyways, the next Elitch Gardens review, it will be my experience on a Vekoma Boomerang. And that's going to be a fun one, so yeah.